Good evening and welcome to the MAGA Institute Book Club's first edition, first episode. I wanted to start with a streaming show tonight, but YouTube is giving us some problems streaming to the channel and having the channel found, so we are going to go this way instead. I am recording this and I will be able to address your comments at a later time instead of seeing comments in a live chat. I do need you, however, to go to YouTube, like the channel, hit the bell, turn on all the notifications. Also make sure that you have notifications turned on for all of YouTube. And a lot of people turn it on just on the channel and they don't realize that they haven't turned on the overall YouTube notifications. So you have to first turn on YouTube notifications and then subscribe to the channel and hit the bell, and please like every video, because liking the video is as important as subscribing and watching. We need to get over 1,000 subscribers. We've got 73, almost 7,400 members now in the Facebook group, so I hope that we can get 1,000 subscribers on the YouTube channel very quickly. That's a threshold we need to hit so that people are going to be able to find the videos, and so we're going to be able to offer you some other features. People have noticed on my Facebook wall and on the Patriot Uprising page over the years that I will occasionally put up some grammar posts and some usage posts. And I don't do it to be pedantic, and I don't do it to make fun of people. I do it in a didactic fashion. I do it to teach. One of the quickest ways to have your argument absolutely ignored is to use poor grammar, have poor spelling. It's not loosing, it's losing, L-O-S-I-N-G. There's no such word in the English language as L-O-O-S-I-N-G. And you're not going to loose your mind, you're going to lose your mind. Things like that make a difference. Why? Timbo, it's just spelling. Everybody knows you meant losing your mind. Yeah, but when you're making arguments to people, when you're trying to be persuasive, when you're trying to bring people around to your way of thinking, that gets in the way. That actually interferes with your mission. It tells people, maybe this person isn't somebody I need to be listening to. If they don't even know how to spell losing, why should I listen to the merits of their argument? Toward that end, I highly recommend this little thin volume, Strunk and White's The Elements of Style. William Strunk was an English professor at Cornell University, and we all know E.B. White from Charlotte's Web and the other wonderful children's books. This right here is the Bible. I have used this since high school. I've used this for 44 years. Is that right? Yeah, I've used this for 44 years. It is indispensable. I also used to teach Stanley Kaplan SAT prep classes in Massachusetts. Over 1,000 high school students I taught to prepare for the SATs. Not one of them had ever heard of this. College students do not know about this, which I think is criminal. They know how to use strap-ons and they know all about condoms and everything else, but they don't know how to write well. And if you can't write well, if you can't speak well, you have the inability to think well. If you can't write succinctly, you're not thinking succinctly. And let me just give you a little taste of what this contains. We've got 11 elementary rules of usage. Things like form the possessive singular of nouns by adding apostrophe s. But when do you not use apostrophe s? If you're talking about a possessive of a name that ends in S, you don't use the second S. James's ends with the apostrophe. Jesus's, Moses's, they all just end with an apostrophe. But the dog's ends with an apostrophe S. Simple little rules that you need to know. Elementary principles of a composition. 22 it's another 11. It starts at 12, so it's another 11 elementary principles of composition. Things like use the active voice, put statements in positive form, omit needless words. And it gives wonderful examples of both good and bad writing. Then we have a few matters of form, where it tells you about punctuation and how to do things appropriately. An entire section on words and expressions commonly misused. And then an approach to style with a list of reminders. Write in a way that comes naturally. Revise and rewrite. Do not overwrite. Do not overstate. Do not affect a breezy manner. It's a fantastic volume to keep coming back to time and time again, no matter whether you're writing letters in a business context, whether you're looking to write a short story or essays that are going to be published on Facebook. I strongly recommend all of you parents and grandparents with children and grandchildren in school, high school, and college, buy them a copy of this. It will be invaluable. It's $10 or $15. It's $10. It's $9.95. You can get it $10 on Amazon. They probably have bulk discounts if you buy several of them. I think this makes a fantastic stocking stuffer for Christmas. I get nothing out of you going to Amazon and buying this, but it will help your children and grandchildren become better writers, become better speakers, and become people that are able to communicate more effectively. George Orwell noted the importance of English, good, proper English, and how the language can be used to further a political end. This is something else that people have listened to me and watched me for the last 5 years now know that I talk about all the time. How never use their words, because once you use their words, they have set the terms of the debate. They have chosen the ground on which you will fight, and you will always lose. Do not give in to their language. They're not pro-choice. You know, the evolution of just that word, pro-choice, is very instructive. The people that wanted to stop abortion, to reverse the Roe v. Wade decision and to protect innocent lives of the unborn, started using the moniker pro-life. They started to say that they were pro-life. The left knew that this was a losing proposition. They could not cede the ground to the anti-abortion people, of which I am diehard, being adopted myself. So they knew that pro-life was a losing proposition for them. So they literally hired a PR firm to come up with a term that they could use, that they could influence minds and get people to converted to their baby-killing, murderous, genocidal, racist side. That term, pro-choice. The PR firm came back and said, you've got to say that you're pro-choice. Make this all about a woman's right to choose. Even though it's a separate life, doesn't matter. It's all about the woman's right to choose. You're pro-choice. Who could possibly be anti-choice? And that is how they use language to set the terms of the debate. This essay was written in 1946. It's 2 years before Orwell's seminal 1984. And it's also instructive to know that 1984 is not 1984. It's the words 1984. He wasn't talking about the specific year 1984, which is hard to believe is 36 years ago now, but about a dystopian future. He wrote the book in 1948, and so he merely flipped the last two numerals of that year to come up with 1984, but he specifically used the words 1984 to point toward a dystopian future, not toward a date certain. We are now in, or soon to be in, that dystopian future. We've already got Big Brother right on our persons. They can have this recording us without our knowledge. People have willingly invited the government in to their homes with Alexa and Google Home. We are seeing a lot of the downsides of technology. Orwell pointed toward this. in 1984. And that's the book that we're going to read beginning next week. But this week, I wanted to go through his 1946 essay, Politics in the English Language. And you will see what I mean about not adopting their terminology, not letting them set the terms of the debate by using their language. We need to use our language so that we set the terms of the debate, so that we don't lose before we even begin to fight. The essay begins, most people who bother with the matter at all would admit that the English language is in a bad way. Mind you, he's writing in 1946. But it is generally assumed that we cannot, by conscious action, do anything about it. Our civilization is decadent, and our language, so the argument runs, must inevitably share in the general collapse. It follows that any struggle against the abuse of language is a sentimental archaism, like preferring candles to electric light or hansom cabs to aeroplanes. Underneath this lies the half-conscious belief that language is a natural growth and not an instrument which we shape for our own purposes. Now, it is clear that the decline of language must ultimately have political and economic causes. It is not due simply to the bad influence of this or that individual writer, but an effect can become a cause, reinforcing the original cause and producing the same effect in an intensified form, and so on indefinitely. This is known as a positive feedback loop. A man may take to drink because he feels himself to be a failure, and then fail all the more completely because he drinks. It is rather the same thing that is happening to the English language. It becomes ugly and inaccurate because our thoughts are foolish, but the slovenliness of our language makes it easier for us to have foolish thoughts. This is what I was talking about before. If you're sloppy with your language, you're sloppy with your thinking. The point is that the process is reversible. Modern English, especially written English, is full of bad habits which spread by imitation and which can be avoided if one is willing to take the necessary trouble, and if one is willing to use a little volume like this to help you with your writing. If one gets rid of these habits, one can think more clearly, and to think clearly is a necessary first step toward political regeneration, so that the fight against bad English is not frivolous and is not the exclusive concern of professional writers. I will come back to this presently, and interestingly, presently doesn't mean now, presently means soon. I will be with you presently. I will be with you in a little while. It's one of those words that is commonly misused and that is discussed in Strunk and White's Elements of Style. I will come back to this presently, and I hope that by that time, the meaning of what I have said here will have become clear. Meanwhile, here are 5 specimens of the English language as it is now habitually written. These 5 passages have not been picked out because they are especially bad. I could have quoted far worse if I had chosen, but because they illustrate various of the mental vices from which we now suffer. They are a little below the average, but are fairly representative examples. I number them so I can refer back to them when necessary. Example 1, from Professor Harold Lasky's essay in Freedom of Expression. I am not indeed sure whether it is not true to say that the Milton who once seemed not unlike a 17th century Shelley had not become, out of an experience ever more bitter in each year, more alien to the founder of that Jesuit sect, which nothing could induce him to tolerate. What? What he's really saying is, I'm not sure whether Milton, who seemed like he was a precursor to the poet Shelley, had not become more alien to the Jesuit sect, something he never would have done. Okay? It's just a very awkward way of making that point. Example 2, from Professor Lancelot Hogben in Interglossia. Above all, we cannot play ducks and drakes with a native battery of idioms which prescribes egregious collocations of vocables as the basic put up with for tolerate or put at a loss for bewilder. This one I love because he is actually advocating clear, concise English using tolerate instead of put up with, using bewilder instead of put at a loss, and he does so in absolute gobbledygook. Above all, we cannot play ducks and drakes with a native battery of idioms which prescribes egregious collocations of vocables as the basic put up with for tolerate or put at a loss for bewilder. Why didn't he just say, we cannot have people using complicated phrases like put up with instead of tolerate or put at a loss instead of bewilder? Just state it directly. Example 3. On the one side, we have the free personality. By definition is not neurotic, for it has neither conflict nor dream. It desires such as they are transparent, for they are just what institutional approval keeps in the forefront of consciousness. Another institutional pattern, and this is all one sentence, that was a semicolon. Another institutional pattern would alter their number and intensity. There is little in them that is natural, irreducible, or culturally dangerous. But, on the other side, the social bond itself is nothing but the mutual reflection of these self-secure integrities. Recall the definition of love. Is not this the very picture of a small academic? Where is there a place in this hall of mirrors for either personality or fraternity? That was an essay on psychology in politics from New York Magazine. We typically see this in the humanities, the social sciences. There's no such thing as a social science. There's science, and then there's psychology and related fields. There's no such thing as social sciences. There's nothing scientific about them. However, they love to use their language to confabulate people. They love to use jargon so that only people on the inside will understand what they're saying. This is particularly so if you read any of the postmodern thinkers, Diderot, Foucault, they obfuscate what they're saying by using very complex and jargonistic language. Example 4 comes from a communist pamphlet. All the best people from the gentlemen's clubs and all the frantic fascist captains, united in common hatred of socialism and bestial horror at the rising tide of the mass revolutionary movement, have turned to acts of provocation, to foul incendiarism, to medieval legends of poisoned wells, to legalize their own destruction of proletarian organizations, and to rouse the agitated petty bourgeois to chauvinistic fervor on behalf of the fight against the revolutionary way out of the crisis. The final example, number 5, comes from a letter in Tribune. If a new spirit is to be infused into this old country, there is one thorny and contentious reform which must be tackled, and that is the humanization and galvanization of the BBC. Timidity here will bespeak canker and atrophy of the soul. The heart of Britain may be sound and of strong beat, for instance, but the British lion's roar at present is like that of Bottom in Shakespeare's A Midsummer Night's Dream, as gentle as any sucking dove. A virile New Britain cannot continue indefinitely to be traduced in the eyes, or rather ears, of the world by the effete languors of Langham Place, brazenly masquerading as quote-unquote standard English. When the voice of Britain is heard at 9 o'clock, better far and infinitely less ludicrous to hear H's honestly dropped than the present priggish, inflated, inhibited, schoolmarmish arch braying of blameless, bashful, mewling maidens. Orwell continues, each of these passages has faults of its own, but quite apart from avoidable ugliness, 2 qualities are common to all of them. The first is staleness of imagery. The other is lack of precision. The writer either has a meaning and cannot express it, or he inadvertently says something else, or he is almost indifferent as to whether his words mean anything or not. This mixture of vagueness and sheer incompetence is the most marked characteristic of modern English prose, and especially of any kind of political writing. As soon as certain topics are raised, the concrete melts into the abstract, and no one seems able to think in terms of speech that are not hackneyed. Prose consists less and less of words chosen for the sake of their meaning, and more of phrases tacked together like sections of a prefabricated henhouse. People often ask me, Timbo, why do you use a $20 word? I said, because sometimes a $20 word expresses my idea much more concisely than 35 $1 words would do. The point isn't to whether to use $20 words or not. The point is to speak precisely and concisely, expressing your meaning as clearly as possible. Why use 35 words when one word will do? Orwell continues, I list below with notes and examples various of the tricks by means of which the work of prose construction is habitually dodged. The first category is dying metaphors. A newly invented metaphor assists thought by evoking a visual image. While, on the other hand, a metaphor which is technically dead, for example, iron resolution, has in effect reverted to being an ordinary word and can be generally used without loss of vividness. But in between these two classes, there is a huge dump of worn-out metaphors which have lost all evocative power and are merely used because they save people the trouble of inventing phrases for themselves. Examples are ring the changes on, take up the cudgel for, toe the line, ride roughshod over, stand shoulder to shoulder with, play into the hands of, no axe to grind, grist to the mill, fishing in troubled waters, on the order of the day, Achilles' heel, swan song, hotbed. Many of these are used without incompatible metaphors. Many of these are used without knowledge of their meaning. What is a rift, for example? And incompatible metaphors are frequently mixed, a sure sign that the writer is not interested in what he is saying. Some metaphors, now current, have been twisted out of their original meaning without those who use them even being aware of the fact. For example, toe the line is sometimes written not T-O-E the line, but T-O-W the line. Well, you're not towing something behind a line, you're putting your toes against the line, you're towing the line. Another example is the hammer and the anvil, now always used with the implication that the anvil gets the worst of it. In real life, it is always the anvil that breaks the hammer, never the other way around. A writer who stopped to think about what he was saying would avoid perverting the original phrase. Second classification is operators or verbal false limbs. These save the trouble of picking out appropriate verbs and nouns and at the same time pad each sentence with extra syllables which give it an appearance of symmetry. Characteristic phrases are render inoperative, militate against, make contact with, be subjected to, give rise to, give grounds for, have the effect of, play a leading part, role in, make itself felt, take effect, exhibit a tendency to, serve the purpose of, etc., etc. The keynote is the elimination of simple verbs. Instead of being a single word, such as break, stop, spoil, mend, kill, a verb becomes a phrase, made up of a noun or adjective tacked on to some general purpose verb, such as prove, serve, form, play, render. In addition, the passive voice is wherever possible used in preference to the active, which is exactly the opposite of what you should be doing. And noun constructions are used instead of gerunds, by examination of instead of by examining. The range of verbs is further cut down by means of the I's and D formations. So I's suffix and D prefix. And the banal statements are given an appearance of profundity by means of the not un formation. Simple conjunctions and prepositions are replaced by such phrases as with respect to, having regard to. And it's not regards, you give your regards to Broadway. But in everything else, you give your regard singular to. But still, that is a phrase that has replaced a simple conjunction or preposition. The fact that, by dint of, in view of, in the interest of, on the hypothesis that, and the ends of sentences are saved by anticlimax by such resounding commonplaces as greatly to be desired, cannot be left out of account, a development to be expected in the near future, deserving of serious consideration, brought to a satisfactory conclusion, and so on and so forth. And did you see what he just did there? Let me reread that. The ends of sentences are saved by anticlimax by such resounding commonplaces. They're not being saved. He's saying that the ends of sentences are being ruined, but he puts it in such a way that he's illustrating his exact point. That was one of my favorite bits of writing in this essay. Another category is pretentious diction. Words like phenomenon, element, individual as a noun, objective, categorical, effective, virtual, basic, primary, promote, constitute, exhibit, exploit, utilize, eliminate, liquidate are used to dress up a simple statement and give an air of scientific impartiality to biased judgments. Adjectives like epoch-making, epic, historic, unforgettable, triumphant, age-old, inevitable, inexorable, veritable are used to dignify the sordid process of international politics, while writing that aims at glorifying war usually takes on an archaic color. Its characteristic words being realm, throne, chariot, mailed fist. And it doesn't mean through the mail, it means with mail, with armor. Trident, sword, shield, buckler, banner, jackboot, clarion. Foreign words and expressions such as cul-de-sac, ancien régime, deus ex machina, mutatis mutandis, status quo, Gleichschaltung, Weltschaltung are used to give an air of culture and elegance, except for the useful abbreviations, i.e. id est, e.g. exempli gratia. Id est means that is, exempli gratia means for example, and etc. There is no real need for any of the hundreds of foreign phrases now current in the English language. I disagree, but I'll save my comments toward the end. Bad writers, and especially scientific, political, and sociological writers, are nearly always haunted by the notion that Latin or Greek words are grander than Saxon ones, and unnecessary words like expedite, ameliorate, predict, extraneous, deracinated, clandestine, subaqueous, and hundreds of others constantly gain ground from their Anglo-Saxon numbers. And there's a footnote here. An interesting illustration of this is the way in which the English flower names, which were in use till very recently, are being ousted by Greek ones. Snapdragon becoming Antirrhinum, Forget-me-not becoming Myosotis, etc. It is hard to see any practical reason for this change of fashion. It is probably due to an instinctive turning away from the more homely word and a vague feeling that the Greek word is scientific. The jargon peculiar to Marxist writing, hyena, hangman, cannibal, petty bourgeois, these gentry, lackey, flunky, mad dog, white guard, etc., consists largely of words translated from Russian, German, or French, but the normal way of coining a new word is to use Latin or Greek root with the appropriate suffix and, where necessary, the size formation. It is often easier to make up words of this kind, deregionalize, impermissible, extramarital, non-fragmentary, and so forth, than to think up the English words that will cover one's meaning. The result, in general, is an increase in slovenliness and vagueness. And here's where I have to disagree with Orwell. And again, these are examples, and I'm reading this essay for its overarching theme of being aware of how sloppy language can lead to sloppy thinking, and that there is a political use of language, and how words are perverted, meanings are twisted, words are made up, such as racism, which was made up solely to promote the communist agenda. But these are not hard and fast rules. So when you read through this essay, it's not a hard and fast rule that you cannot use the word exploit or exhibit or extraneous or use foreign phrases. In fact, Orwell here is evincing a strong Anglo-Saxon bias as opposed to an internationalist bias. Remember, this was 1946. England had just defeated Germany in World War II and had just spent a lot of time in France. And we all know the history of England and France. Even though they were on the same side in World War II, there's no great love lost between the English and the French. There is an insularity that he is evincing in this essay, but I would remind everyone that English, by its very nature, is a language that absorbs other words from other languages. Algebra, and there are many words from German that have been brought in, not just Latin and Greek. Words from Scandinavian languages, words from Japanese languages. You know, we all call it karaoke. So I would pay a little less attention to the specifics of the essay and focus more on the overarching theme about how poor writing can lead to poor thinking. Another category is meaningless words. In certain kinds of writing, particularly in art criticism and literary criticism, and I would say now in postmodernist critique, it is normal to come across long passages which are almost completely lacking in meaning. Here's another footnote. Example, Comfort's Catholicity, and by that means universality, not anything to do with the Roman Catholic Church. Comfort's Catholicity of perception and image, strangely Whitmanesque in range, almost the exact opposite in aesthetic compulsion, continues to evoke that trembling atmospheric accumulative hinting at a cruel and inexorably serene timelessness. Ray Gardner scores by aiming at simple bullseyes with precision, only they are not so simple, and though this contented sadness runs more than the surface bittersweet of resignation. That's from the Poetry Quarterly. You find a lot of this gobbledygook in academic writing. Orwell continues, words like romantic, plastic, values, human, dead, sentimental, natural, vitality is used in art criticism are strictly meaningless in the sense that they not only do not point to any discoverable object, but are hardly ever expected to do so by the reader. When one critic writes, the outstanding feature of Mr. X's work is its living quality, while another writes, the immediately striking thing about Mr. X's work is its peculiar deadness, the reader accepts this as a simple difference of opinion. If words like black and white were involved, instead of the jargon words dead and living, he would see at once that language was being used in an improper way. Many political words are similarly abused. The word fascism now has no meaning, except insofar as it signifies something not desirable. We see this now. Leftists who are literally fascists, who literally want the government to control private businesses, they are actual fascists, accuse conservatives who advocate for freedom and for liberty and for individual choice and individual rights. They call us fascists. So the word fascism is something that now has no meaning, except insofar as it signifies, quote unquote, something not desirable. The words democracy, socialism, freedom, patriotic, realistic, justice have each of them several different meanings which cannot be reconciled with one another. In the case of a word like democracy, not only is there no agreed definition, but the attempt to make one is resisted from all sides. We say that we're not a democracy, we are a republic. Democrats call Abraham Lincoln a Democrat because he believed in giving the slaves the vote. Lincoln was no more of a Democrat than Ronald Reagan was after he changed parties. Lincoln was the first Republican president, but Northeastern Illinois University in Chicago, Illinois will not change that plaque, and today it still reads, Abraham Lincoln, Democrat. Well, we all know that Lincoln was no Democrat. It is almost universally felt, Orwell continues, that when we call a country democratic, we are praising it. Consequently, the defenders of every kind of regime claim that it is a democracy and fear that they might have to stop using that word if it were tied down to any one meaning. You know, was Iraq a democracy just because people were forced to vote for one man? Was Russia ever a democracy, even though the Politburo was elected unanimously year after year? Words of this kind are often used in a consciously dishonest way, and this is the meat of the essay right here. That is, the person who uses them has his own private definition, but allows his hearer to think he means something quite different. Statements like, Marshal Pétain was a true patriot, the Soviet press is the freest in the world, the Catholic Church is opposed to persecution, are almost always made with intent to deceive. Well, that's not true, because the Catholic Church actually is opposed to persecution. There he's showing his Church of England biases. Other words used in variable meanings, in most cases more or less dishonestly, are class, totalitarian, science, progressive, reactionary, bourgeois, equality. Now that I've made this catalog of swindles and perversions, let me give another example of the kind of writing that they lead to. This time, it must of its nature be an imaginary one. I'm going to translate a passage of good English into modern English of the worst sort. Here is a well-known verse from Ecclesiastes. I returned and saw under the sun that the race was not to the swift, nor the battle to the strong, neither yet bread to the wise, nor yet riches to men of understanding, nor yet favor to men of skill, but time and chance happeneth to them all. Here it is in modern English. Objective considerations of contemporary phenomena compel the conclusion that success or failure in competitive activities exhibits no tendency to be commensurate with innate capacity, but that a considerable element of the unpredictable must invariably be taken into account. This is a parody, but not a very gross one, meaning not by much. Exhibit 3 above, and Exhibit 3 was the essay on psychology and politics from New York Magazine. On the one side, we have the free personality. By definition, it is not neurotic, for it is neither conflict nor dream. Its desires, such as they are transparent, for they are just what institutional approval keeps in the forefront of consciousness. Another institutional pattern would alter their number and intensity. There is little in them that is natural, irreducible, or culturally dangerous. But, on the other side, the social bond itself is nothing but the mutual reflection of these self-secure integrities. Recall the definition of love. Is not this the very picture of a small academic? Where is there a place in this hall of mirrors for either personality or fraternity? That was Exhibit 3 above. Exhibit 3 above, for instance, contains several patches of the same kind of English. It will be seen that I have not made a full translation. The beginning and ending of the sentence of his example here follow the original meaning fairly closely, the original meaning of the passage from Ecclesiastes very closely. But in the middle, the concrete illustrations, race, battle, bread, dissolve into the vague phrases success or failures in competitive activities. This had to be so because no modern writer of the kind I am discussing, no one capable of using phrases like objective considerations of contemporary phenomena, would ever tabulate his thoughts in that precise and detailed way. The whole tendency of modern prose is away from concreteness. And again, this right here is the heart of his essay. And it's actually one way that you can tell that someone is trying to bamboozle you, to flim-flam you, to obfuscate their meaning with a word salad that means nothing. Anytime you see that, you know that someone is trying to get over on you. Now analyze these two sentences a little more closely. The Ecclesiastes quote and then his modern English translation. The first, from Ecclesiastes, contains 49 words but only 60 syllables, meaning they're all short words. And all of its words are those of everyday life. I returned and saw under the sun that the race is not to the swift nor the battle to the strong, neither yet bread to the wise, nor yet riches to men of understanding, nor yet favor to men of skill, but time and chance happeneth to them all. The second contains 38 words of 90 syllables. 18 of those words are from Latin roots, 1 from Greek. The first sentence contains 6 vivid images, and only one phrase, time and chance, that could be called vague. The second contains not a single fresh, arresting phrase, and in spite of its 90 syllables, it gives only a shortened version of the meaning contained in the first, meaning it goes the long way around to say a whole lot less than the first sentence, which used the short, direct words. Yet, without a doubt, it is the second kind of sentence that is gaining ground in modern English. Objective considerations of contemporary phenomena compel the conclusion that success or failure in competitive activities exhibits no tendency to be commensurate with innate capacity, but that a considerable element of the unpredictable must invariably be taken into account. Now, which of those two sentences uses language most effectively? Clearly, it's the first that uses short, direct, concrete words to clearly express meaning of the author. The second is a word salad of long words and phrases that serve to muddy the waters, to obscure the meaning of the writer. I do not want to exaggerate, Orwell continues. This kind of writing is not yet universal, and outcrops of simplicity will occur here or there in the worst written page. Still, if you or I were told to write a few lines on the uncertainty of human fortunes, we should probably come much nearer to my imaginary sentence than to one from Ecclesiastes, meaning the modern tendency is to write more floridly and more obtusely. Again, this is 1946. Imagine what Orwell would think with today's PC culture, where you can't even use pronouns correctly without being attacked. As I have tried to show, continues Orwell, modern writing at its worst does not consist in picking out words for the sake of their meaning and inventing images in order to make the meaning clearer. It consists in gumming together long strips of words which have already been set in order by someone else and making the results presentable by sheer humbug. The attraction of this way of writing is that it's easy. It is easier, even quicker, once you have the habit, to say, in my opinion, it is not an unjustifiable assumption that, rather than to say, I think. If you use ready-made phrases, you not only don't have to hunt about for the words, you also don't have to bother with rhythms of your sentences, since these phrases are generally so arranged as to be more or less euphonious, meaning pleasing to the ear. When you are composing in a hurry, when you are dictating to a stenographer, for instance, or making a public speech, it is natural to fall into a pretentious Latinized style. Tags like a consideration which we should do well to bear in mind, or a conclusion to which all of us would readily assent, will save many a sentence from coming down with a bump. By using, and again, the sentence isn't being saved. He's saying he's adding so much cushion in there, there's no way the sentence can drop hard and express its meaning clearly. By using stale metaphors, similes, and idioms, you save much mental effort, at the cost of leaving your meaning vague, not only for your reader, but for yourself. This is the significance of mixed metaphors. The sole aim of a metaphor is to call up a visual image. When these images clash, as in the fascist octopus has sung its swan song, is it an octopus or a swan? The jackboot is thrown into the melting pot. Wait a second, it's a boot. It's not metal into a pot. It can be taken as certain that the writer is not seeing a mental image of the objects he is naming. In other words, he is not really thinking. Look again at the examples I gave in the beginning of this essay. Professor Lasky, in example 1, uses 5 negatives in 53 words. I am not, indeed, sure whether it is not true to say that the Milton who once seemed not unlike a 17th century Shelley had not become, out of an experience ever more bitter in each year, more alien to the founder of that Jesuit sect, which nothing could induce him to tolerate. One of these is superfluous, making nonsense the whole passage. And in addition, there is the slip, alien for akin. So he meant to say more akin to the founder of that Jesuit sect, but he said exactly the opposite. He said alien. So the meaning of the sentence is completely perverted, because what he wanted to say was Shelley, what he wanted to say was that Milton because he got, because of more experience that was bitter year after year, became more akin to the founder of the Jesuit sect, St. Ignatius Loyola, which nothing could ever have induced him in life to tolerate. So the point is that Milton's experience made him more like St. Ignatius of Loyola than he ever would have admitted to being. But because he used the wrong word alien for akin, meaning alike, the complete meaning of the sentence has flipped. And in addition, there is the slip, alien for akin, making further nonsense in several avoidable pieces of clumsiness which increase the general vagueness. Professor Hogben, in example 2, plays ducks and drakes with a battery which is able to write prescriptions, and while disapproving of the everyday phrase put up with, is unwilling to look egregious up in the dictionary and see what it means. Again, that sentence was, above all, we cannot play ducks and drakes with a native battery of idioms which prescribes egregious collocations of vocables as the basic put up with for tolerate or put at a loss for bewilder. Well, why are collocations of vocables egregious? It's not the right word. What he means to say is excessive. And see what, in example 3, if one takes an uncharitable attitude toward it, and that was the essay on psychology and politics, is simply meaningless. Probably one could work out its intended meaning by reading the whole article in which it occurs. In example 4, which is from a communist pamphlet, the writer knows more or less what he wants to say, but an accumulation of stale phrases chokes him like tea leaves blocking a sink. In example 5, which is from a letter in Tribune, an English magazine, in words, meaning have almost parted company. People who write in this manner usually have a general emotional meaning. They dislike one thing and want to express solidarity with another, but they are not interested in the detail of what they are saying. A scrupulous writer, in every sentence that he writes, will ask himself at least 4 questions. Thus, what am I trying to say? What words will express it? What image or idiom will make it clearer? Is this image fresh enough to have an effect? And he will probably ask himself 2 more. Could I put it more shortly? And have I said anything that is avoidably ugly? But you're not obliged to go to all this trouble. You can shirk it simply by throwing your mind open and letting the ready-made phrases come crowding in. They will construct your sentences for you, even think your thoughts for you to a certain extent. And at need, they will perform the important service of partially concealing your meaning, even from yourself. It is at this point that the special connection between politics and the debasement of language becomes clear. See, what he's saying is, he's saying, you don't have to go to all this trouble. Just open your mind and use sloppy language, and all those stupid ideas are going to come rushing in to the point where you don't even know what you're saying yourself. And again, that's what I'm saying. Don't use their language. If you use their language, you're incorporating their ideas into your argument, and you've already lost. In our time, and again, remember he's writing in 1946, it is broadly true that political writing is bad writing. Where it is not true, it will generally be found that the writer is some kind of rebel, expressing his private opinions and not a party line. Orthodoxy of whatever color, meaning blue for Tories or Republicans and red for Labor, Communists, and Democrats, seems to demand a lifeless, imitative style. The political dialects to be found in pamphlets, leading articles, manifestos, white papers, and the speeches of undersecretaries do, of course, vary from party to party, but they are all alike in that one almost never finds in them a fresh, vivid, homemade turn of speech. Again, this was 1946. William Safire was Nixon's speechwriter. We've had several great speechwriters that actually have used wonderful turns of phrase in the intervening decades. When one watches some tired hack on the platform mechanically repeating the familiar phrases, bestial, atrocities, iron heel, bloodstained tyranny, free peoples of the world, stand shoulder to shoulder, I'm getting a sense that he wasn't much of a Churchillian Orwell. One often has a curious feeling that one is not watching a live human being but some kind of dummy, a feeling which suddenly becomes stronger at moments when the light catches the speaker's spectacles and turns them into blank discs which seem to have no eyes behind them. And this is not altogether fanciful. A speaker who uses that kind of phraseology has gone some distance towards turning himself into a machine. The appropriate noises are coming out of his larynx, but his brain is not involved, as it would be if he were choosing his words for himself. If the speech he is making is one that he is accustomed to making over and over again, he may be almost unconscious of what he is saying, as one is when one utters the responses in church. He's talking here about the typical stump speech. You give it so many times that you stop to even think about what the words mean. In this reduced state of consciousness, if not indispensable, is at any rate favorable to political conformity. In our time, political speech and writing are largely the defense of the indefensible. Things like the continuance of British rule in India, the Russian purges and deportations, the dropping of the atom bombs on Japan can indeed be defended, but only by arguments which are too brutal for most people to face, and which do not square with the professed aims of the political parties. Meaning, yeah, you can say exactly why you're doing it, but nobody's going to want to hear you say it that directly. Thus, political language has to consist largely of euphemism, question begging, and sheer cloudy vagueness. I mean, we saw this particularly in the Vietnam War, to the point where one general famously said, in order to save the village, we had to destroy it. Defenseless villages are bombarded from the air, the inhabitants driven out in the countryside, the cattle machine gunned, the huts set on fire with incendiary bullets. This is called pacification. Millions of peasants are robbed of their farms and sent trudging along the roads with no more than they can carry. This is called transfer of population or rectification of frontiers. People are imprisoned for years without trial, or shot in the back of the neck, or sent to die of scurvy in Arctic lumber camps. This is called elimination of unreliable elements. Such phraseology is needed if one wants to name things without calling up mental pictures of them. Consider, for instance, some comfortable English professor defending Russian totalitarianism. He cannot say outright, I believe in killing off your opponents when you can get good results by doing so. Probably, therefore, he will say something like this. While freely conceding that the Soviet regime exhibits certain features which the humanitarian may be inclined to deplore, we must, I think, agree that a certain curtailment of the right to political opposition is an unavoidable concomitant of transitional periods, and that the rigors which the Russian people have been called upon to undergo have been amply justified in the sphere of concrete achievement. Indeed. The inflated style itself is a kind of euphemism. A mass of Latin words falls upon the facts like soft snow, blurring the outline and covering up all the details. The great enemy of clear language is insincerity. When there's a gap between one's real and one's declared aims, one turns as if it were instinctively to long words and exhausted idioms, like a cuttlefish spurting out ink. In our age, there is no such thing as, quote, keeping out of politics. All issues are political issues, and politics itself is a mass of lies, evasions, folly, hatred, and schizophrenia. Again, 1946, not 2020, but it's still applicable. When the general atmosphere is bad, language must suffer. I should expect to find, this is a guess which I have not sufficient knowledge to verify, that the German, Russian, and Italian languages have all deteriorated in the last 10 or 15 years as the result of dictatorship. But if thought corrupts language, language can also corrupt thought. A bad usage can spread by tradition and imitation, even among people who should and do know better. I see things like case and point. It's not what the phrase is. The phrase is case in point. But people have just become accustomed. I should of, OF, because they're hearing the contraction should have, not for should have, but for should of. Should of means nothing. It's not of, it's have. But if thought corrupts language, language can also corrupt thought. A bad usage can spread by tradition and imitation, even among people who should and do know better. The debased language that I have been discussing is in some ways very convenient. Phrases like, a not unjustifiable assumption, leaves much to be desired, would serve no good purpose, a consideration which we should do well to bear in mind, are a continuous temptation, a packet of aspirin always at one's elbow. Look back through this essay, and for certain you will find that I have again and again committed the very faults I am protesting against. He has. I've pointed them out. He's done it to great effect. By this morning's post, I have received a pamphlet dealing with conditions in Germany. The author tells me that he, quote, felt impelled, end quote, to write it. I open it at random, and there is almost the first sentence I see. The Allies have an opportunity not only of achieving a radical transformation of Germany's social and political structure in such a way as to avoid a nationalistic reaction in Germany itself, but at the same time of laying the foundations of a cooperative and unified Europe. You see, he feels impelled to write. He feels, presumably, that he has something new to say, and yet his words, like cavalry horses answering the bugles, group themselves automatically into the familiar dreary pattern. This invasion of one's mind by ready-made phrases, lay the foundations, achieve a radical transformation, can only be prevented if one is constantly on guard against them, and every such phrase anesthetizes a portion of one's brain. I said earlier that the cadence of our language is probably curable. Those who deny this would argue, if they produced an argument at all, the language merely reflects existing social conditions, and that we cannot influence its development by any direct tinkering with the words and constructions. So far as the general tone or spirit of language goes, this may be true, but it is not true in detail. Silly words and expressions have often disappeared, not through any evolutionary process, but owing to the conscious action of a minority. We've seen this with the word retarded, for example. Whereas it was never meant to be pejorative, it came to become felt as though it was pejorative, and now people no longer use that word to regard people who are disabled. Two recent examples were Explore Every Avenue and Leave No Stone Unturned, which were killed by the jeers of a few journalists. There is a long list of fly-blown metaphors which could similarly be got rid of if enough people would interest themselves in the job, and it should also be possible to laugh the not-un formation out of existence. Footnote 3 here, one can cure oneself of the not-un formation by memorizing this sentence. A not-un-black dog was chasing a not-un-small rabbit across a not-un-green field. To reduce the amount of Latin and Greek in the average sentence, to drive out foreign phrases and strayed scientific words, and in general to make pretentiousness unfashionable. But all of these are minor points. The defense of the English language implies more than this, and perhaps it is best to start by saying what it does not imply. To begin with, it has nothing to do with archaism, with the salvaging of obsolete words and turns of speech, or with the setting up of a standard English, which must never be departed from. You see what he did by dangling the participle there? He's again doing it intentionally. Instead of saying from which one must never depart, he says which must never be departed from. On the contrary, it is especially concerned with the scrapping of every word or idiom which has outworn its usefulness. It has nothing to do with correct grammar and syntax, which are of no importance so long as one makes one's meaning clear, or with the avoidance of Americanisms, or with having what is called good prose style. On the other hand, it is not concerned with fake simplicity in the attempt to make written English colloquial. Nor does it even imply in every case preferring the Saxon word to the Latin one, although it does imply using the fewest and shortest words that will cover one's meaning. What is above all needed is to let the meaning choose the word, and not the other way around. And that's the political use, okay? If you use their words, you're using their meaning. You need to use your own words that have your own meaning. And by using sloppy words, you're implying sloppy meaning. You've got sloppiness of thought. So you want to use clear, concrete, succinct words. Let me repeat that because it's important. What is above all needed is to let the meaning choose the word and not the other way around. In prose, the worst thing one can do with words is to surrender to them. When you think of a concrete object, you think wordlessly. And then, if you want to describe the thing you have been visualizing, you probably hunt about until you find the exact word that seems to fit. When you think of something abstract, you are more inclined to use words from the start. And unless you make a conscious effort to prevent it, the existing dialect will come rushing in and do the job for you at the expense of blurring or even changing your meaning. Probably it is better to put off using words as long as possible and get one's meaning as clear as one can through pictures and sensations. Afterward, one can choose, not simply accept, the phrases that will cover the meaning, and then switch around and decide which impressions one words are most likely to make on another person. Every good writer does this. First you write something, but then you read it as though you were reading it from the writer. You want to make sure that your voice came through to the reader. This last effort of the mind cuts out all stale or mixed images, all prefabricated phrases, needless repetitions, and humbug and vagueness generally. But one can often be in doubt about the effect of a word or phrase, and one needs rules that one can rely on when instinct fails. I think the following rules will cover most cases. 1. Never use a metaphor, simile, or other figure of speech which you are used to seeing in print. I wouldn't say never, but you don't want to use tired phrases. 2. Never use a long word where a short one will do. Absolutely. Unless the long word expresses the idea more clearly than the short word. Again, you're going for clarity. If it is possible to cut a word out, always cut it out. Again, I stay away from always, but whenever possible, definitely streamline your prose. 4, never use the passive where you can use the active. Absolutely, 100%, never. That is a never. 5, never use a foreign phrase, a scientific word, or a jargon word if you can think of an everyday English equivalent. However, that just means don't be grandiose. Sometimes the scientific word, the jargon word, is the appropriate word. 6, break any of these rules sooner than say anything outright barbarous, meaning throw these words out the window if it's going to lead you to a sentence that is horrible to read or to hear. These rules sound elementary, and so they are, but they demand a deep change of attitude in anyone who has grown used to writing in the style now fashionable. One could keep all of them and still write bad English, but one could not write the kind of stuff that I quoted in those 5 specimens at the beginning of the article. I have not here been considering the literary use of language, but merely language as an instrument for expressing and not for concealing or preventing thought. In other words, the political use of language. Stuart Chase and others have come near to claiming that all abstract words are meaningless and have used this as a pretext for advocating a kind of political quietism. Since you don't know what fascism is, how can you struggle against fascism? One need not swallow such absurdities as this, but one ought to recognize that the present political chaos is connected with the decay of language, and that one can probably bring about some improvement by starting at the verbal end. If you simplify your English, you are freed from the worst follies of orthodoxy. You cannot speak any of the necessary dialects, and when you make a stupid remark, its stupidity will be obvious, even to yourself. Political language, and with variations, this is true of all political parties, from conservatives to anarchists, political language is designed to make lies sound truthful and murder respectable, and to give an appearance of solidity to pure wind. They're not taxes, it's revenue. We're not raising taxes, we're enhancing revenue. Okay, see that? One cannot change all this in a moment, but one can at least change one's own habits, and from time to time one can even, if one jeers loudly enough, send some worn-out and useless phrase, some jackboot, Achilles heel, hotbed, melting pot, acid test, veritable inferno, or other lump of verbal refuse into the dustbin where it belongs. And again, I would quote himself back to himself and say that some of those words actually have come back to good meaning, just as he used the word iron resolve in the beginning, especially jackboot. You know, we're seeing Democrat governors with their jackboot on their state citizenry these days. I think Achilles heel is a great image because in 2 words it conveys one's overall weakness without having to have a whole paragraph to describe what you mean. But in general, I think that his points are well taken. You would be well advised to take them in hand. Also well advised to purchase a copy of Strunk and White's The Elements of Style for yourself, your own use if you're a writer, or for any of your children or grandchildren who are in school. It will help their writing tremendously. That's it for the first edition. Look forward to embarking on this journey with you next week with 1984. Until then, God bless you. God bless these United States. Keep fighting the good fight.